I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled up to my service truck that Tuesday morning in Scottsdale, Arizona, and saw the passenger door slightly ajar. My name is Oliver Hayes, and I run a mobile diesel repair business serving construction sites and trucking companies throughout the Phoenix metropolitan area. I had parked my white Ford F-550 service truck outside my house the night before like I always did, and I was certain I had locked it. The neighborhood of Copper Ridge Estates had always seemed safe enough, despite the increasingly aggressive homeowners association that seemed to have a problem with everything I did. I approached the truck slowly, my coffee still steaming in my hand. The early morning Arizona sun was already beating down, promising another scorcher of a day. When I pulled open the door fully, my stomach dropped. The cab had been ransacked. Papers were scattered everywhere, my console was open, and worst of all, when I walked around to check the service compartments on the back of the truck, I found 3 panels hanging open. Gone. My grease guns were completely gone. These were not cheap hardware store grease guns. I had 3 professional-grade pneumatic grease guns, each worth about $800, along with my entire collection of grease fittings, adapters, and specialized nozzles. We were talking about close to $3,000 in equipment that I used literally every single day. Without them, I could not do half the jobs I had scheduled. I immediately called the police, and then I called my insurance company. While I waited for the officer to arrive, I started checking my truck more carefully. My toolboxes were untouched, which was strange. Someone had specifically gone for the grease guns and nothing else. Not my impact wrenches, not my diagnostic computer worth $5,000, not even the $200 in cash I kept in the console for emergencies. Just the grease guns. The Scottsdale police officer who showed up was professional but not particularly optimistic. Officer Martinez took my report, looked around the truck, and basically told me what I already knew. Without witnesses or security camera footage, the chances of recovering the equipment were slim. Check online marketplaces, he suggested. Sometimes thieves try to sell stuff on Facebook Marketplace or offer up. If you see your equipment listed, give us a call immediately and do not attempt to confront them yourself. After he left, I sat in my truck trying to figure out how I was going to handle the 4 jobs I had scheduled for the day. I was about to start making calls to reschedule when my phone rang. It was my buddy Jake from 2 streets over. "Hey man, I just saw someone walking around your truck last night around midnight," Jake said. "I was coming home late from my shift and I saw someone with a flashlight near your truck. Thought it was you at first, so I did not think anything of it. But now that I think about it, the person seemed shorter than you, and they were wearing what looked like a bathrobe or something." "A bathrobe?" I asked, confused. "Yeah, or maybe it was a long coat. It was dark. I am sorry, man, I should have stopped." "No, it's okay. Did you see anything else?" "A car, maybe." There was a silver Lexus SUV parked a few houses down with its hazards on. I remember thinking that was weird, but again, I just thought maybe it was someone having car trouble or something. Silver Lexus SUV. I only knew one person in the neighborhood who drove a silver Lexus SUV and regularly wore long, flowing cardigans that could look like a bathrobe from a distance. Deborah Richardson, the president of the Copper Ridge Estates HOA and the biggest pain in my rear end for the past 6 months. Deborah had been on my case since the day I moved in. First, it was complaints about my service truck being parked in front of my own house. She claimed it was a commercial vehicle and violated the HOA covenants. I pointed out that the covenants only restricted commercial vehicles over a certain weight and mine was within limits. Then she complained about the time I got home, saying my diesel engine was too loud at 6 in the morning. Then she complained about me occasionally working on equipment in my driveway on weekends. The complaints escalated when I refused to pay a fine she tried to levy against me for having work boots visible on my front porch. Work boots on my own front porch. I told her exactly what she could do with her fine, and things had been icy ever since. But stealing? Would she really be that petty and that stupid? I called Officer Martinez back and told him about what Jake had seen. He said he would look into it, but reminded me that someone walking near my truck was not probable cause for a search warrant. I needed actual evidence. That's when I remembered the GPS trackers. About 2 months earlier, after another contractor I knew had $5,000 in tools stolen from his truck, I had invested in some small GPS tracking devices. I had hidden them in various pieces of my most valuable equipment, including inside the housing of each of my grease guns. The trackers were designed for asset tracking, had long battery lives, and could be monitored through an app on my phone. I yanked out my phone and opened the tracking app, my hands shaking slightly from anger and adrenaline. The app took a moment to load, and then 3 dots appeared on the map. All 3 of my grease guns were showing a location about 4 streets away from my house, still in the neighborhood. And when I zoomed in on the exact address, my suspicions were confirmed. They were at Deborah Richardson's house. I took a screenshot of the GPS locations, noting the timestamp, and immediately called Officer Martinez back. This time, there was more interest in his voice. "You are absolutely certain these GPS coordinates are accurate?" he asked. "These trackers are accurate to within about 10 feet. All 3 of my stolen grease guns are at the same address, and that address belongs to the HOA president who has been harassing me for months. Do not, and I cannot stress this enough, do not go over there yourself," Officer Martinez said. "I am going to contact my supervisor and we will handle this. Keep monitoring the location and let me know immediately if anything moves." The next few hours were torture. I had to cancel my morning appointments, costing me about $1,500 in lost revenue for the day. I sat in my living room, watching the GPS dots on my phone like a hawk while simultaneously checking the Ring doorbell camera footage from the night before. My camera only covered my front door and porch, not the street where my truck was parked, but I scrubbed through the footage anyway. At 11:53 the previous night, there was a flash of light visible in the frame, like headlights from a car moving slowly down the street. At 12:07, another flash. The timing matched up with what Jake had described. Around 2 in the afternoon, Officer Martinez called me back along with a Detective Stevens who was now handling the case since it involved a tracking investigation, and the value of stolen goods pushed it into felony territory. "Mr. Hayes, this is Detective Stevens. I have reviewed your GPS tracking evidence and the statement from your witness. We have obtained a search warrant for Miss Richardson's property. We will be executing that warrant within the next hour. I need you to stay at your residence and remain available in case we need you to identify your property." "Absolutely. Thank you, Detective. I have to ask, and please be honest because this will come up if we find the items. Is there any reason, Miss Richardson would claim you gave her permission to take these items, or that there was some kind of arrangement between you two?" "None whatsoever. The woman has been trying to find me and make my life miserable since I moved in here 8 months ago. We have no arrangement, no friendship, nothing. I want her prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Understood. Stay by your phone." I tried to distract myself by doing paperwork, but I kept checking the GPS app every few minutes. The dots had not moved. Whatever Deborah had done with my grease guns, They were still at her property. At 3:15, I saw police vehicles rolling slowly down my street. 2 marked Scottsdale PD units and 1 unmarked car that I assumed was Detective Stevens. They passed my house and continued toward Deborah's address on Sagaro Lane. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "Mr. Hayes, this is Detective Stevens. We need you to come to 8847 Sagaro Lane to identify property. Please bring any documentation you have proving ownership, including receipts, serial numbers, or photographs." I grabbed my laptop, which had all my business records, and drove the 4 streets over to Deborah's house. The scene was almost surreal. Deborah was standing on her perfectly manicured lawn, her face red and twisted in anger, yelling at the officers while her husband Leonard stood helplessly beside her looking mortified. "This is harassment. This is because I have been trying to enforce neighborhood standards. This is retaliation." She was screaming. Detective Stevens, a tall woman in her 40s with short gray hair, was standing calmly with her arms crossed, completely unfazed by the tirade. When she saw me pull up, she walked over to my truck. "Mr. Hayes, come with me, please." She led me around to the back of the house where there was a large storage shed. The shed door was open, and inside, sitting on a workbench among gardening tools and paint cans, were my 3 grease guns along with all the fittings and accessories. Still in the plastic bins I stored them in. "Are these your items?" Detective Stevens asked. I stepped closer, my anger rising again at seeing my equipment just sitting there. "Yes, these are definitely mine. This one here," I pointed to the largest grease gun, "has my company name engraved on the side, Hayes Mobile Diesel. And if you check this bin, the bottom has my business phone number written in silver Sharpie." Officer Martinez, who was also there, lifted the bin and confirmed the phone number. "Can you provide documentation of ownership?" I opened my laptop right there in the shed and pulled up my business expense records. Here are the purchase receipts from Granger Industrial. This one was purchased 14 months ago. These 2 were purchased together 7 months ago. Here are photos from my insurance documentation showing all 3 with serial numbers visible. Detective Stevens compared the serial numbers on my receipts to the actual equipment. Everything matched perfectly. "These are definitely his items," she confirmed to Officer Martinez. "Bag them as evidence and document everything." As we walked back around to the front of the house, Deborah saw me and her eyes went wide. Then her expression changed from shock to fury. You probably put those there yourself to frame me. I have never stolen anything in my entire life." "Madam, you need to stop talking," Detective Stevens said firmly. "Deborah Richardson, you are being placed under arrest for felony theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "This is insane. Leonard, call our lawyer." "This is a setup," Deborah shrieked as Officer Martinez handcuffed her. Leonard looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. "Deborah, please just be quiet," he pleaded. As they led her to the patrol car, Deborah continued to protest loudly, attracting the attention of every neighbor on the block. People were coming out of their houses, standing on their lawns, watching as the HOA president was arrested and placed in the back of a police cruiser. Detective Stevens turned to me. "We will need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. Your equipment will be held as evidence until the case is resolved, but I will make sure it is documented so you can claim it through insurance in the meantime." "How long will the case take?" I asked. "That depends on a lot of factors. If she pleads guilty, could be a few weeks. If she fights it and it goes to trial, could be months. But with the GPS evidence and the items being found exactly where you said they would be, this is about as solid a case as it gets." Over the next few days, the story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. I had several neighbors stop by or call me to say they had always thought Deborah was on a power trip, but never imagined she would actually commit a crime. A few people mentioned they had noticed Deborah acting strangely over the past few months, becoming more obsessive about rule enforcement and seemingly targeting people she perceived as not fitting the neighborhood's image. Jake came over with a six-pack of beer the evening after the arrest. We sat in my garage while I worked on reorganizing my truck with rental equipment I had obtained so I could get back to work. "Dude, everyone is talking about it," Jake said, shaking his head. "My wife is in the neighborhood Facebook group, and it is absolute chaos. Half the people are defending Deborah, saying there must be some misunderstanding, and the other half are saying they are glad someone finally stood up to her tyranny. It is not tyranny to enforce reasonable HOA rules," I said. "But what she was doing went way beyond reasonable. She was harassing people, and apparently she decided theft was an acceptable way to get revenge or prove some kind of point. What point could she possibly be trying to prove by stealing your grease guns?" Jake asked. "Honestly, I think she was trying to make my life harder. Without those tools, I cannot work. Maybe she thought if she made it impossible for me to do my job, I would have to move out of the neighborhood. Or maybe she was just so angry at me for not bowing to her authority that she wanted to hurt me financially. That is psychotic. That is what happens when someone gets a little bit of power and lets it completely go to their head." The following week, I had to appear at the Scottsdale City Court for the preliminary hearing. Deborah had hired an expensive lawyer, some guy in a $3,000 suit who looked like he handled white-collar crime cases for rich defendants. The lawyer's strategy was predictable. He argued that there was some kind of misunderstanding, that perhaps Deborah had found the items and was holding them for safekeeping, intending to return them. He suggested that maybe there had been a miscommunication, or that someone else had placed the items in her shed without her knowledge. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Amanda Chen, absolutely demolished that defense. "Your Honor, the defendant's property is secured with locked gates and fences. The shed where the stolen items were found was locked with a padlock to which only the defendant and her husband have keys. The items were discovered on a Tuesday afternoon, hidden behind paint cans and garden equipment, nearly 40 hours after they were stolen. At no point during those 40 hours did the defendant contact police to report finding suspicious property. At no point did she contact Mr. Hayes, despite knowing exactly who he was and where he lived. Additionally, we have a witness who observed someone matching the defendant's description at the victim's truck at approximately midnight on the night of the theft, and the witness observed a vehicle matching the defendant's silver Lexus SUV in the vicinity." "But, Your Honor," the defense attorney interjected, "there is no direct evidence placing my client at the scene of the alleged theft. The witness statement is vague and circumstantial." "What about the GPS tracking evidence?" the judge asked, flipping through the case file. "The GPS evidence only proves the location of the items after they were taken," the defense lawyer argued. "It does not prove how they got there or who moved them." "Your Honor," Prosecutor Chen said, "the statistical probability of these specific items being stolen from Mr. Hayes's truck and coincidentally ending up in the shed of the one person in the neighborhood who had been actively harassing him for months is astronomical. Combined with the witness statement and the defendant's complete failure to report finding the items or return them, we believe we have more than sufficient evidence to proceed with felony theft charges." The judge, an older man with gray hair and reading glasses perched on his nose, looked at Deborah sternly. "Miss Richardson, I am binding you over for trial on one count of felony theft. Your bail will remain as set. You are not to have any contact with the victim, directly or indirectly. That includes through the homeowners association. You understand? Yes, Your Honor, Deborah said quietly, her earlier bravado completely gone. Your Honor, regarding the HOA restriction, the defense attorney said, my client is the elected president of the association. Restricting her from HOA activities effectively removes her from her elected position. Then I suggest the HOA hold a special election, the judge said flatly. This court's order stands. No contact means no contact, including no HOA communications, no fines, no complaints, nothing. If I hear that Miss Richardson has violated this order in any way, bail will be revoked. Are we clear? Yes, Your Honor, the lawyer said, looking displeased. As I left the courthouse, I felt a sense of vindication but also exhaustion. This whole situation was ridiculous and unnecessary. If Deborah had just left me alone and let me live my life, none of this would have happened. Over the next month, the HOA was in complete disarray. Deborah had apparently been handling everything herself, refusing to delegate or share responsibilities. With her forced to step down pending the outcome of her trial, nobody knew what meetings were scheduled, what contractors were under agreement, or even what the current budget situation was. An emergency election was held, and a guy named Robert Chen, who lived on the next street over, was elected as interim president. Robert was a retired accountant, calm and reasonable, everything Deborah was not. One of his first actions was to review all the fines and complaints that had been issued over the past year. He called me about 3 weeks after taking over. Oliver, this is Robert Chen, the new HOA president. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Sure, what is up? I have been reviewing the files, and I owe you an apology on behalf of the association. The fines and complaints that were issued to you were completely out of line with our actual covenants and bylaws. In fact, most of them were not even valid. Your service truck is well within the size restrictions. There is no restriction on what time you can arrive home, and there is certainly no rule about work boots on your porch. I appreciate you saying that, I said. I am formally rescinding all fines issued to you. You will not owe anything. Additionally, I want you to know that the board is looking into whether Miss Richardson issued similar invalid fines to other homeowners. If she did, and if any pattern of abuse of power is established, the association may pursue its own legal action against her. Wow. Okay. And Oliver, I am truly sorry this happened. HOAs are supposed to maintain property values and handle common area maintenance, not harass homeowners or, God forbid, commit crimes against them. If you have any issues going forward, my door is always open. Thanks, Robert. I really appreciate that. The trial was scheduled for late May, about 3 months after the initial theft. Deborah's lawyer had tried multiple motions to get the case dismissed or the evidence suppressed, but none of them worked. The GPS tracking evidence was deemed admissible. Jake's witness testimony was deemed credible enough to present to a jury, and my documentation of ownership was ironclad. 2 weeks before the trial was set to begin, Prosecutor Chen called me. Mr. Hayes, I wanted to let you know that the defense has approached us about a plea deal. What kind of deal? They are offering to plead guilty to a reduced charge of misdemeanor theft if we recommend probation and community service with no jail time. What do you think I should do? I asked. That is ultimately up to you as the victim. I can tell you that if we go to trial, I am very confident we will get a conviction on the felony charge. However, trials are unpredictable, and there is always a chance a jury could acquit or hang. With a guilty plea, we have a guaranteed conviction, and she will have a criminal record. She would also have to pay restitution for your equipment and any financial losses you incurred. How much financial loss are we talking about? That is for you to document. Lost wages, rental equipment costs, any other expenses directly related to the theft. I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to see Deborah face the full consequences of a felony conviction. But another part of me just wanted this whole mess to be over so I could move on with my life. What about her ever being able to serve on the HOA board again? I asked. That would be up to your HOA's bylaws. But most HOAs have provisions preventing people with criminal convictions from serving in leadership positions. Then I will accept the plea deal, but I want maximum community service hours, and I want her banned from ever holding an HOA position again as part of the deal. I will see what I can do. The final plea agreement included Deborah pleading guilty to misdemeanor theft, 1 year of probation, 300 hours of community service, full restitution to me totaling $4,800, which covered my stolen equipment value, rental costs, and lost wages, and a provision that she would resign from the HOA board and not seek any HOA leadership position for at least 5 years. The plea hearing was brief. Deborah stood before the judge and admitted that on the night in question, she had taken property belonging to me without permission. She did not elaborate on why or provide any excuse. Her lawyer had clearly told her to say as little as possible. The judge accepted the plea and imposed the sentence. As Deborah left the courtroom, she glanced at me briefly. I expected to see anger or resentment, but instead, I saw something that looked almost like shame or embarrassment. For just a moment, she looked like someone who had realized she had thrown away her reputation and standing over something incredibly stupid. I never found out exactly why Deborah decided to steal my grease guns that night. During her plea, she did not offer an explanation, and I did not particularly care to seek one out. Maybe it was a culmination of months of frustration that I would not bend to her will. Maybe she thought if I could not work, I would have to move. Or maybe she just wanted to hurt me because I had dared to stand up to her petty tyranny. Whatever her reasoning, it cost her dearly. Within weeks of her conviction, she and Leonard put their house up for sale. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Leonard was humiliated by the whole situation and wanted a fresh start somewhere else. They moved out before the house even sold, relocating to somewhere in Nevada. The restitution check arrived about 2 weeks after the plea hearing. I used it to buy even better equipment than what had been stolen, including upgraded grease guns with better GPS tracking integrated directly into the units by the manufacturer. Robert Chen did an excellent job as HOA president. He streamlined the rules, eliminated the petty nonsense that Deborah had been enforcing, and focused the association's efforts on actual community maintenance and improvement. The neighborhood became a much more pleasant place to live. Jake and I had a cookout in my backyard about a month after everything was finally resolved. Several neighbors came over, and we all laughed about the absurdity of the whole situation. Someone brought a poster board and made a joke, wall of shame, with printed screenshots of the angry Facebook posts Deborah had made over the months before her arrest. We took a photo with the poster and then threw it in the fire pit. "Good riddance to bad rubbish," Jake said, raising his beer. "I will drink to that," I agreed. The incident became something of a legend in Copper Ridge Estates. New residents would hear the story of the HOA president who stole grease guns and got busted by GPS trackers. It served as a cautionary tale about what happens when someone lets a little bit of authority go to their head. For me, it was a reminder of why I had installed those GPS trackers in the first place, and a validation that taking precautions to protect your property is never a waste of money. Those $200 tracking devices saved me from a potential total loss and led directly to justice being served. My business continued to grow. Word got around about what had happened, and several contractors reached out to say they respected how I had handled the situation and wanted to work with someone who was professional and stood up for themselves. I ended up landing 3 major service contracts that more than made up for the hassle and stress of dealing with Deborah's theft and the subsequent legal proceedings. One afternoon, about 6 months after everything concluded, I was working on a truck at a construction site in Mesa when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Oliver Hayes?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Patricia Morrison. I live in a neighborhood in Chandler, and I am having issues with an overly aggressive HOA president. I heard about what happened with you in Scottsdale, and I was wondering if you would be willing to talk to me about how you handled it." I smiled. Apparently, my story had spread even further than I realized. "Sure, I can talk. What is going on in your neighborhood?" As Patricia explained her situation, which involved an HOA president trying to fine her for having the wrong shade of beige paint on her house trim, I realized that Deborah Richardson was far from the only petty tyrant serving on HOA boards across Arizona. But I also realized that people were starting to push back, to stand up for themselves, and to demand that HOAs operate within reasonable bounds. I gave Patricia some advice about documenting everything, knowing her rights under Arizona HOA law, and not being afraid to challenge invalid fines. I also recommended she look into surveillance cameras and GPS tracking for valuable property, just in case her situation escalated. "Thank you so much," she said. "It helps to know someone else went through this and came out okay on the other side. You will be fine," I assured her. "Just remember, these people only have the power you give them. Know your rights, stand your ground, and do not let them intimidate you." After we hung up, I sat in my truck for a moment, looking out at the construction site. The whole ordeal with Deborah had been stressful and frustrating, but it had also taught me a lot about standing up for myself and not letting bullies push me around, regardless of what minor authority they might hold. That evening, I drove home through the quiet streets of Copper Ridge Estates. My service truck was parked in its usual spot in front of my house, and nobody complained. My work boots sat on my front porch, and nobody cared. I arrived home at 6 in the morning from jobs, and my diesel engine disturbed no one, or at least nobody bothered to harass me about it. The neighborhood had returned to what it should have been all along. A place where people lived their lives, minded their own business, and coexisted peacefully without someone standing over them with a ruler measuring whether their grass was a quarter-inch too long or their truck was parked 3 inches over some imaginary line. I walked into my house, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat down on my back patio. The Arizona sunset was painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. My phone buzzed with tomorrow's work schedule. 5 jobs lined up, all with my fully functional grease guns and equipment ready to go. Life was good. The story of Deborah Richardson's spectacular fall from grace became something I would occasionally reflect on, usually when I heard about some other HOA horror story on the news or from a friend. It reminded me that karma does exist, that justice can prevail, and that sometimes the people who try hardest to make others miserable end up engineering their own downfall. The GPS trackers that had seemed like a minor investment for peace of mind had turned out to be the key piece of evidence that brought a thief to justice. Technology, used properly, was a powerful tool. I recommended those trackers to every contractor and service professional I met. Several of them later thanked me when they were able to recover stolen equipment or track down thieves. Robert Chen and I became friendly over the following months. He ran the HOA the way it should be run, efficiently, fairly, and with a light touch. The neighborhood thrived under his leadership. Property values actually increased once word got around that the crazy HOA president was gone and the new leadership was reasonable. One day, Robert stopped by while I was washing my truck. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "For what?" I asked. "For standing up to Deborah. I know a lot of people who were frustrated with how she was running things, but everyone was too afraid to challenge her. You refusing to back down and then catching her red-handed, it freed the whole neighborhood from her tyranny. I know that probably was not your intention. You were just defending your property and your rights, but the ripple effect has been really positive. I appreciate that, Robert. I was not trying to be any kind of hero. I was just a guy who got robbed and had the tools to catch the person who did it." "Sometimes that is all it takes," Robert said. "One person willing to stand up and say enough is enough." We chatted for a few more minutes about neighborhood business and upcoming community events. As Robert walked back to his house, I realized he was right. I had not set out to take down a corrupt HOA president. I had just refused to be bullied and had taken reasonable precautions to protect my property. But in doing so, I had inadvertently sparked a change that benefited everyone in the neighborhood. The legal consequences for Deborah had been significant but not devastating. She had a criminal record now, which would follow her for the rest of her life. She had to perform hundreds of hours of community service. She had to pay thousands of dollars in restitution. And she had to leave the neighborhood in shame, her reputation completely destroyed. But she was not in prison. She could rebuild her life in Nevada or wherever she ended up. The punishment fit the crime. She had stolen property worth a few $1,000s and caused me significant inconvenience and financial harm. In return, she faced legal consequences, financial penalties, and social consequences. That seemed fair to me. I never harbored any ongoing anger toward Deborah. Once the legal case was resolved and I received my restitution, I moved on. Life was too short to waste energy on grudges or bitterness. She had made a stupid decision driven by pettiness and an inflated sense of authority, and she had paid the price for it. That was the end of the story as far as I was concerned. My business continued to expand. I hired an assistant, a young guy fresh out of technical school named Marcus, who was eager to learn the diesel repair trade. Training him gave me someone to share the workload with and allowed me to take on even more contracts. We ended up needing a second service truck, which I parked in my driveway alongside the first one. Nobody from the HOA complained. Marcus heard the story about the grease gun theft from other contractors before I ever mentioned it to him. One day while we were driving to a job site, he brought it up. "So is it true you caught an HOA lady stealing your stuff with GPS trackers?" he asked. "Unfortunately, yes." "That really happened?" "Dude, that is wild. Why would an HOA president steal from you?" "Because she was on a power trip, and I would not bow down to her ridiculous demands. Some people cannot handle having any authority. It goes straight to their heads and they think they are above the law." "Did you ever find out why she specifically took the grease guns? Like, why not tools that are easier to sell?" That was a good question, one I had wondered about myself. "Honestly, I think she took them specifically because she knew I needed them for my work. She was not trying to steal something valuable to sell. She was trying to sabotage my business. She wanted me to not be able to work, maybe hoping I would have to move out of the neighborhood. That is psychotic. Yeah, it was pretty crazy, but it worked out in the end. She got caught, got convicted, and had to leave the neighborhood herself. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. I am definitely getting GPS trackers for my tools once I have enough stuff worth protecting. Smart move. Best investment I ever made. The months turned into a year, then 2 years. The incident with Deborah gradually faded from daily conversation in the neighborhood, though it remained a story that got told at barbecues and block parties. New residents heard about it as part of the neighborhood lore. Old residents would occasionally bring it up when discussing HOA policies, or whenever someone suggested giving the HOA board more enforcement powers. Remember what happened with Deborah Richardson? Someone would inevitably say, and that would be the end of any proposal to expand HOA authority. The Copper Ridge Estates, HOA under Robert Chen's continued leadership, became one of the most smoothly run community associations in Scottsdale. People actually wanted to serve on the board because it was no longer a toxic environment. Meetings were productive and brief. Rules were enforced fairly and reasonably. The common areas were well maintained. It was everything an HOA should be. I eventually served a term on the board myself as treasurer. It seemed like a good way to give back to the community and make sure the association continued on its positive path. During my time on the board, I helped implement clear procedures for fines and complaints, requiring board votes for any fine over $50, and mandating that homeowners be given written notice and an opportunity to respond before any penalty was imposed. These procedures were common sense, but they had not existed under Deborah's reign. She had acted unilaterally, issuing fines and complaints without consulting anyone else on the board, many of whom had been too intimidated to challenge her. The new procedures prevented any future HOA president from abusing their authority the way Deborah had. My service truck, which had been at the center of so many of Deborah's complaints, became a familiar and welcome sight in the neighborhood. When neighbors had questions about their own vehicles or equipment, they would stop by and ask me for advice. I helped jump-start cars, diagnosed mysterious engine noises, and gave recommendations for good mechanics. The truck that had once been a source of controversy became a community asset. One Saturday afternoon, I was working in my garage when a moving truck pulled up across the street. A new family was moving into the house that had been empty for a few months. I walked over to introduce myself, as had become the friendly custom in the neighborhood. "Hi, I am Oliver Hayes. Welcome to Copper Ridge Estates." The husband, a guy probably in his mid-30s, shook my hand. "Thanks. I am David. This is my wife Susan. We are excited to be here. Great neighborhood. If you have any questions about anything, feel free to ask." "Actually," David said, lowering his voice slightly, "we heard this neighborhood had some issues with the HOA a few years back. Some president who went crazy or something." I smiled. "Yeah, that was a whole situation, but it got resolved. The current HOA leadership is great. Reasonable people who understand what an HOA should and should not do." "That is good to hear. We were a little nervous after reading some of the old online reviews for the neighborhood. Those reviews were probably from when Deborah Richardson was in charge. She made a lot of people miserable until she got caught stealing from my work truck and ended up with a criminal conviction." David's eyes widened. "Wait, the HOA president stole from you?" "Yep. Took about $3,000 in equipment from my service truck parked right there." I pointed to my truck. "But I had GPS trackers hidden in the equipment. Led the police right to her shed. She ended up pleading guilty and having to move out of the neighborhood." "Wow, that is intense." "It was ridiculous. But like I said, that whole era is over. The neighborhood has been great for the past couple of years. You will be happy here." And they were. David and Susan became good friends of mine. Their kids played in the street with the other neighborhood children. They attended community events. They never received a single unreasonable HOA complaint. That is what a neighborhood should be. As I write this now, 5 years after the incident with Deborah Richardson, I still live in Copper Ridge Estates. I still run my mobile diesel repair business, which has grown into a team of 4 technicians with a fleet of service trucks. I still park my truck in front of my house every night. And I still have GPS trackers in all my valuable equipment, though I have never needed to use them to track down stolen property again. The story of the HOA Karen who stole my grease guns and got busted by GPS technology has become a bit of a legend in contractor circles around Phoenix. I have been interviewed for online articles about protecting your business property and about dealing with aggressive HOAs. My story has been shared thousands of times on social media, usually with the hashtag HOA Nightmare or something similar. But for me, it is just a strange chapter in my life. A reminder that people can do incredibly stupid things when they let anger and pettiness drive their decisions. A reminder that taking precautions to protect yourself and your property is never paranoia. It is just smart planning. And a reminder that standing up for yourself, even when it is difficult or uncomfortable, is always the right choice. Deborah Richardson made a choice to steal from me because she was frustrated that she could not control me. That choice led directly to her arrest, conviction, public humiliation, and having to leave the neighborhood she had been so obsessed with controlling. It was a spectacular self-inflicted downfall that could have been avoided if she had just minded her own business and let people live their lives. I hope she learned something from the experience. I hope she is living a quieter life now in Nevada or wherever she ended up. I hope she never again lets a small amount of power corrupt her judgment and turn her into a petty tyrant. As for me, I learned that justice does exist. It may not be quick, and it may require some effort and investment on your part, but if you document everything, protect your property, and stand firm on your rights, the truth will eventually prevail. The GPS trackers that caught Deborah cost me about $600 total for the set. That investment led directly to recovering $3,000 in stolen equipment and receiving an additional $1,800 in restitution for lost wages and rental costs. More importantly, it led to a criminal conviction that removed a toxic presence from my neighborhood and paved the way for much better community leadership. I still recommend those GPS trackers to everyone in a similar business. I have probably convinced dozens of contractors and service professionals to invest in tracking technology, and I know for a fact that at least 3 of them have successfully recovered stolen equipment as a result. The technology is only getting better and more affordable too. Newer tracking devices have longer battery lives, more precise location accuracy, and better integration with smartphones and computers. Some can even send instant alerts if they are moved outside a designated area, allowing you to catch thieves in the act. But beyond the technology, the real lesson is simpler. Document everything, know your rights, and do not let bullies push you around. Whether it is an HOA president overstepping their authority, or anyone else trying to intimidate or harm you, standing your ground and demanding accountability is essential. My life now is peaceful and productive. I run a successful business. I live in a great neighborhood with reasonable HOA leadership, and I have the satisfaction of knowing that when someone tried to harm me out of spite, I did not just roll over and accept it. I fought back using the law and technology, and justice prevailed. The whole experience also taught me the importance of community. The neighbors who supported me, who provided witness statements, who voted out the toxic HOA leadership. They made all the difference. No one can fight every battle alone. Having good people around you who will stand up for what is right makes all the challenges of life more manageable. So that is my story. The tale of how an HOA Karen stole my grease guns and how GPS trackers led the police right to her shed. It is a story about technology, justice, standing up for yourself, and the importance of reasonable community leadership. It is a cautionary tale about what happens when people abuse authority. And it is ultimately a story with a happy ending, which is not something you can say about every conflict in life. If you are dealing with an unreasonable HOA or any similar situation where someone is abusing a position of authority, I hope my story gives you some encouragement. Document everything. Protect your property. Know your rights. Stand your ground. And when necessary, use the legal system to hold people accountable for their actions. And if you are considering installing GPS trackers on your valuable equipment, do it. Best $600 I ever spent.